All right, Brian, so good to have you here. Welcome to the Groundwork podcast, where we interview the leaders at global ecosystem companies around the world, building amazing teams and organizations. I'm really excited to have Brian here. Brian's the senior platform partnerships lead at Shopify, also has had a really interesting background that we're going to hear a little bit more about today. Particularly interesting for me is we haven't covered e-commerce enough on the pod, and I just heard your CEO speak at a conference I was at the other day, and he had some fascinating positions on like helping companies build their businesses. And you've been in the space of helping companies build their businesses for a little while between Shopify and Buffer. So really excited to learn a little bit more about your journey and how you got here today. So maybe if you could start there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This is awesome. Were you at the All In Summit in Los Angeles? Is that where you're?
I was.
Excellent. How was that? How was that conference?
It was fantastic. Yeah, it was
Wonderful.
really amazing. Lots of interesting speakers, and a lot to learn. And we run our own conference as well, Catalyst, and so we were kind of there, like, are they going to be able to do a good job of this, given none of them really have like much conference experience, but they did a really great job. The speakers were just incredible, and that
market research. Yeah, nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, well, yeah, again, thanks for having me. Yeah, Brian Peters. I am currently leading an app partnerships team here at Shopify, and that really means it's our core platform that all of our applications build into. So we manage the partnerships and relationships across all of those technology partnerships. Everything from email marketing to SMS to loyalty and store design, pretty much all of the categories you can imagine that a merchant, as we call them, would use to build their online store presence, market and sell those products.
That's awesome. And could you tell us a little bit about how you got to that role? Because you've had a really interesting background. Would love to hear where you started out.
Yeah, for sure. A bridged version of my career trajectory was a comms major in college, which didn't have a lot of career choices after being a communications major, so went right into sales. Sales led me, I was at an insurance brokerage, and I realized that I really couldn't sell effectively unless I leveraged social media. This was circa 2011, 2012. And it was right around the time that Facebook had really started to bloom as an area that you could use for like customer acquisition, particularly for selling to businesses. And so I realized that like Facebook was kind of like the best tool I had to sell. And then that led it to an interest in like Facebook advertising and marketing. And at the time, a position opened up at a university that I had attended. And then so I became the director of social media there because of my experience on the marketing side. That led sort of further down the path of understanding the social media's role in a company's success and growth. That led me to a company called Buffer. And so Buffer is a social media management platform. I started there as their director of social media. And what I realized is that like the most effective content, the content that I would create, because I led their sort of social media and digital marketing team, I realized that the most effective content that we would post on social media always had like an element of like co-collaboration with either another brand or platform. And it always had data. It was like 100, like how X brand increased their social media engagement by 162%. So I started to realize like data mattered. And then I also realized that anytime we would do a sort of collaboration content post with another brand, it always got double, triple reach. And so like I just naturally started morphing into like what was sort of like a co-marketing role. I didn't really know it at the time. I was just kind of like, this content seems like it's working well. And so that led to a co-marketing role. And then what that ended up doing was sort of opening up this glaring, because obviously like Buffer is built on all the social media platforms. We use APIs to help schedule posts across all the platforms. And what we were realizing was like, yeah, we're doing all these great co-marketing campaigns with companies, but the companies that literally we run our business on, like now Meta and Facebook at the time, Twitter, LinkedIn, like we should probably have a relationship with these companies, given that we're a platform, they're a platform. And if you don't know the APIs that you're building on, at least the teams that are building those APIs, like your business could suffer. And I remember in 2018, Facebook made a change that they deprecated the API that allowed personal people, not business accounts, to schedule posts to their platform. Mm-hmm. And that was like 30% of our business at the time. And so the CEO came to me, is like, can you go just like fly to California because I was living in Denver. I was like, go fly to California and like go meet some Facebook people. I was like, well, that's probably not going to happen. I'm not just like going to go knock on Facebook's door. But that really opened up this idea of like partnerships to me. And that was around 2018. And I think this is really around the time when companies started to think about APIs and platforms and partnerships as like a true role at organizations. I know they were at that point already, like the bigger companies were doing it really well. But it was interesting to see the sort of shift in startups at the time to say like, no matter what size you are as a company, your relationship with other platforms matters a lot. And actually, you can't really get anything done as a platform unless you're talking to the companies that are that you're built on and that are building on you. And so that sort of morphed into like this director of partnerships role at Buffer. I was blogging and doing a lot of personal sort of like brand building at the time because that was a very popular thing to do, personal brand. And I ended up writing a blog post called, I think I titled it like How We're Building a Partnerships Organization at Buffer. One of the folks at Shopify saw the post, asked me if I wanted to come run partnerships at Shopify, and the rest is history. So I've been here 4 years now and deeply embedded in the technology ecosystem at Shopify and having a lot of fun on the other side of the platform this time rather than knocking on Facebook's door.
Yeah. And it is amazing to me. And I worked at a company that was in a similar space, not a similar space, but had a similar situation where for a little bit over a year, I worked at a company called AppFollow, which is like a app review sentiment analysis type product, right? So the entire business required Apple to expose reviews publicly. Same thing with the Google Play Store. It's like if people weren't exposing those reviews or allowing you to like go in and analyze those, then the company ceased to exist.
Right.
There was no conversation with Apple or Google about that. And so they could just change that with no notice and the business ceased to exist. And it is amazing how many companies there are like that build on top of a platform and yet still don't have much of a relationship with the company. Now, Facebook.
Well, I feel a lot of empathy for those companies because I know, and it sounds like, like I know what it's like to be on the other side where you're just scrapping to try to get noticed and FaceTime. And so I like to think that I have a little bit more empathy than others when it comes to that. But now that I am on the sort of platform side and we have, 10,000 developers building on our ecosystem and hundreds of thousands of more just like independent agencies and developers building, I know why it's such a hard problem for a platform to solve because believe it or not, internally, I wish I could talk to every developer and tell them our roadmap and try to share as much as we can. It's just like there's only so many hours in the day. So now knowing that, I try to implement things that will help the broadest number of developers, knowing that there's a you and me on the other side of that with a CEO asking them like, why don't we have a relationship with that company? And then being like, well, they're just not answering my emails, So I like to think that I have at least a little bit more empathy for those folks.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that experience probably really helps you with that. A similar thing, like Optimizely was pretty big, but it wasn't as reliant on Facebook. But like we did have some landing page stuff, so the integrating with the ads platform and getting more data there would have been really valuable for us.
Yeah.
Like being able, Optimizely was a big, well-known company at the time. So we were able to get meetings with Facebook, but like we never tracked down the right people to become a marketing partner or whatever, it was definitely.
Oh yeah. The Facebook marketing partners. Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you had any more success with that.
I don't think anybody did.
No,
talk about a black box.
I know. Yeah. My understanding was it was like something that they ran for a while and then decided that no one else was going to join. And it was like, that was it.
Yeah. They did a good job. I mean, I don't know what, like the makeup of your audience that listens to this, but like talk about the art of building a program. A lot of it is like in the facade externally than it is like the actual value of the program. And building something like that is like, it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, 100%. Yeah. The folks that listen to this, I would say there's like two primary audiences. And I'm excited. This leads up my next question. So one is people in partnership roles, like definitely mostly heads of, directors, VPs of partnerships that are trying to get better at their craft. And that's like our primary audience. Our secondary audience are people that are trying to figure out how to partner with a particular company, and they come and listen to these as examples and pointers. And so that's where I was going to go next, because we talked about developers who want to have a relationship with a company like Shopify, but like maybe don't know how to navigate it. I think most of the time there isn't a partnerships person on the other side at these companies. It's like, because they're smaller businesses, maybe it would only be Shopify that they would have a partnership with, and so it doesn't make as much sense. And so, like, how do you think about a founder or like a commercial person at one of these small developers trying to navigate a relationship with a big company like Shopify?
Yeah, for sure. And like, to be clear, I think the founder should be the partnerships person for a very long time. And then the first hire at any startup should be an agency and or revenue partnerships person. Just so everybody knows, like I always share this with developers, is like 40 to 50%. Like if you look at our top developers in the Shopify ecosystem, 30, 40, 50%, the ones who do really well, 30, 40, 50% of their revenue comes from agency referrals. So if your stack ranking order of partnerships is like, should always be founder, second should always be like the first role you hire should be driven, like revenue driven. And then the third role is like as your company grows, then you can start to think about having a dedicated person for like the actual sort of platform approach, because that does become like pretty important over time. But in the beginning, it's more about like the revenue driving. So yeah, I speak with founders who are the partnerships people all the time. And I think it's like, it makes a ton of sense. I think like there's like kind of two ways to answer this. And I'll give you the first reason or the first way to partner with Shopify. And no one's going to like to hear this answer. But the first way is like kind of make it hard to ignore you. And what I mean by that is the majority of my conversations with founders revolves around two things. Like, hey, how do I become more successful in the ecosystem? And I can share pointers on that. Of course, in this podcast, I don't necessarily need to. But the other one is like, how can you help us grow? And my response to like the founders in this situation is like, building a company or an integration on Shopify is no different. Even if you start out on Shopify, like that's your first like sort of SaaS platform play, it's no different than building a SaaS platform off of Shopify. You have to do all the things that are going to help grow your company that you would on Shopify versus off Shopify. The beauty about using a platform in your early stage like Shopify is that you get something like the App Store as like a growth lever. And so like if I was thinking about it, it's like if I started a SaaS company today, I would build for Shopify and have that be a growth lever for me, but I would instantly be diversifying across other platforms or even just non-commerce spaces. And so like once you've started to build that merchant demand through all of the typical SaaS approaches and all the growth approaches that you should be doing anyways, and you're then able to come to someone like myself or any of my colleagues and say like, hey, look at this success that we've had in the ecosystem. And like, here's how many merchants use us. Here's how much like GMV that represents. Here's how much like impact we're having in the ecosystem. And then at that, it's much easier to get our attention if you have those data points than it is to like say, like, hey, we're just starting out. Like, what are the best practices? Because you can find that online. So that's what I typically tell founders who are like first starting out. And then the other thing too is Shopify is, like, different platforms take different approaches. If you look at other commerce platforms that are not Shopify, so like Salesforce or Commerce Tools, whatever, and this is not a critique on any of those platforms, they're all successful, is like there's different approaches to what they value in partnerships. And Shopify values a lot of like product-driven, like led founders who care a lot about the integrations they're building. What we care less so on the product side about is like, like we have revenue targets, of course, but like we don't care as much about the revenue side because we think about product first. Now, up in the enterprise space, of course, like we have agency teams, we have SI teams, we care a lot about that stuff when it comes to enterprise acquisition. But for the majority of Shopify merchants, what my team is primarily focused on is like who's building the best product.
Yeah.
And so for founders out there, like lead with your impact in the ecosystem, and then lead with the quality of products that you're building across the Shopify APIs. And like, I think that's how you get noticed in product-led companies. And they're like more and more so are a lot of those these days. And that's, I always find, is a great place to start the conversation rather than just sort of like the generic, like, how do I grow together?
Yeah, I love that. And I think that that's even potentially more common across other ecosystems than you would imagine, because even though AWS or Salesforce have more commercial DNA, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
like, often you're talking to the account managers on the big enterprise accounts, and what they really care about is the traction and the quality
Yeah.
of the product again. Because it's like, well, is this going to solve a problem for my customer? And if it
Yeah.
does, and it's going to delight the customer, then I'm going to let them know that you exist. Otherwise, maybe not.
Totally. And I think like a little bit is being sort of realistic with expectations. I think it's kind of like, like weight classes. When you're just starting out as a startup, like, you could probably expect to partner with other startups. If you're like in the like mid stage, maybe a couple million in revenue, you're probably getting, like, I would say that, like, that's how we always approach it at Buffer, is like we would look for companies that were at the same stage as us, because they were the companies that are like, oh, I know Buffer or I know Shopify. So like, I think it's just more maybe a little bit being realistic of like, okay, I know I'm an early founder and I know I'm building a great product, of course. Like, is Shopify truly going to partner with me now?
Yeah.
And if so, like, what would be the reason? Like, realistically, why would Shopify partner with me? Like, one, I'm going to help bring them new customers, or two, like, I'm solving some unique gap and I'm seeing merchant demand. Because we looked at two things, like net new merchant acquisition, like what are the partners that are going to help us drive new merchants to the platform, or two, where are merchants going? And we use like, install data. Like, merchants are a lot of people ask me, like, if you left Shopify, what app would you build? And I actually don't really have an answer for that. Merchants are exponentially smarter than anybody working on the platform are. They always spot trends before we do.
Mm, cool.
So it's kind of like, yeah, it's like, if you have the install data, we'll pay attention. Or if you're going to help Shopify bring new customers in, we'll pay attention. Otherwise, like, it doesn't hurt to like partner with companies at the same size
Yeah.
that are in the Shopify ecosystem.
Yeah, I love that. My advice for anyone starting out in partnerships is always that. What I actually say is like 6 months ahead of you. So it's like
Right.
they're like the same size, but they're just a little bit bigger. So like
Yes, a little bit bigger. Yeah, absolutely.
one more marketing person. So it's just like
Yep.
you still get to kind of like punch up a little bit. But like not so much that it doesn't make sense for them to spend any time with you. I think that makes a bunch of sense. And you mentioned a couple of times that, like, if someone does have the metrics, if they do have this exceptional product offering, like, is the smart thing to just reach out to as many people as they can until they find the right person? Or is there like a team that's like looking out for that stuff? Or how does that work if they are hitting that criteria, even though they're smaller? Or will your team find them?
It's a good question. Like, the answer that I probably should be giving is like, we'll find you, because our team is constantly looking at metrics internally.
Yeah.
There's probably like a few different things that would likely happen is like, the partnerships team would continually hear this in conversations internally. Like, hey, have you heard about X app? Like, they keep coming up in like our enterprise deals. They keep coming up in our plus merchant segment. So I would say, like, generally speaking, we have like a pretty good understanding of who the top apps in the ecosystem are. The second sort of order effect of that is like, there are a lot of like product go-to-market opportunities that might be available for partners in the space. And I think those are great opportunities to sort of showcase what you do. So like, it's no secret Shopify is building like a fully extensible checkout that we have been doing for several years now. And we care a lot about it. There's a ton of opportunities in the checkout space, upsell and loyalty and post-purchase and order status page. Like, those are the areas that we talk a lot about at Editions, like our big biannual sort of conference that's online. We feature partners that aren't the like standard household names all the time in that. And again, it kind of goes back to that like product driven company is like, we care like, what products are you building on what APIs? And is there an opportunity for us to help showcase you? I think if I think about some other ones, like, we're very early hydrogen days, and hydrogen is sort of our like headless like SDK, if you will, that helps you build online storefronts. We're looking for partners to support hydrogen all the time. And so like, that's an area of opportunity. Like, we're growing in the B2B space, obviously POS and retail are huge areas. So I think if you're a company trying to get noticed by Shopify, like, start with where Shopify is on a product roadmap perspective and find out where there might be opportunities to build. And we talk about those all the time on our blogs and then in the editions. And it's the individual product teams that have way more, I would say, like freedom to do things with partners than, like, say, my team. Like, my team's a team of 6, and like, we're obviously constrained by resources.
Yeah.
And so, like, I always say, like, go find the product teams and the marketing teams that are launching individual products, and like tie your ship to one of those and get featured that way. And then, like, slowly, and then again, like, yeah, and then partner with other companies and slowly but surely, like, build that name recognition internally. And then the third thing is like, obviously Shopify is not, it's no secret that we invest in companies and we acquire companies. It's not very often that we do it. We're pretty strategic about it. But if you're a like early stage growth or mid stage growth company and you're building like really cool tools or products within the Shopify ecosystem, like, that team is always on the lookout for really interesting things being built. Again, it's more of like, they'll reach out to you. But there's lots of opportunities to get in front of Shopify teams. Just like, I just find that the Shopify ecosystem is daunting and massive when you first join it. And then you start to realize that it's like actually a pretty tight-knit small community. And there's really 3 sort of like parties. It's merchants, agencies, and tech partners. Yeah. And trust me, they all talk.
Yeah.
If you're building something that's valuable, you will get noticed. I almost guarantee it. It might take some time and it might be frustrating as hell for a while, but it is a very small community and you will get noticed if you're building the right things and merchants are adopting what you're building.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we had an awesome local Seattle founder called Emily Yang on the show before. And she has a Shopify app called, the company's called Automic. And it's really cool, like helps with like adding subscription functionality into like Shopify stores, which is awesome. Like the number of times I buy something online from a Shopify store and I'm like, oh, I'd just love for this to show up every month, rather than me having to try and remember.
Yeah. How many subscriptions do you have? That's the question.
Yeah, exactly. Not enough. Honestly, I have to, I buy this wine from
Not enough. See, merchants need more of you in the world.
Maybe. Exactly. I was talking to her on the show and she was talking about, like their focus is more on the agencies than it is on partnering.
Oh yeah, as it should be. Yeah,
exactly. And really a forcing function of agencies being proactive with them and wanting to use their product, and them just finding that agencies are the people that are working with their customers so often.
Totally. You'll find, I think a lot of like partnerships people in the ecosystem will find that Shopify is a very heavily driven agency ecosystem.
Yeah. Do you think that that's like common across the e-commerce space? I mean, I bet it was common across when you were at Buffer in the social media space. You think it's common in e-commerce as well?
I actually found, yeah, you're right. In the social media space for sure. I didn't realize, I don't think at the time, because we're like, you could put Buffer in the B2B category.
Yeah.
I don't remember agencies playing such a prominent role in revenue in B2B as I do in commerce, just because like commerce is so complex. And if you think about what commerce is, it's like your online storefront, which are typically always, like, especially if you're a big brand, always custom built, and you're probably using an agency to do that. And then it's very like, and I'm speaking of more of like upmarket merchants, but like there's a lot of things like custom build, like ERP integrations, marketing integrations, online storefront integrations. I do find that like commerce is generally agency and SI driven more. And maybe I just was early days, or like because Buffer was a startup, I just didn't notice it much. I'm sure if I was at like some other B2B company that was much larger, probably is heavily agency, but commerce is like pretty mind blowing, the impact that agencies and SIs have on business.
That's amazing, and really an astute observation, especially like because I think you're right that it's just like it's not in the DNA of these businesses, and so like how do people connect the dots between, okay, I'm a tech company, I'm building something on Shopify, I want to engage with the agencies in the ecosystem. Is there an element of proactivity that you can recommend for these types of folks? Or is this like a, hey, they'll find you situation as well?
It's a good question. I think it goes back to the conversation about like weight class.
Mm-hmm.
like there is a lot of knocking on doors in the beginning. And I think you have to find the agencies that align with your values, that align with a gap that they might have in technology, and that aligns with like a little bit of merchant demand. Like I imagine it's like a lot like medical sales is like you have to go convince the doctor that they should use your technology, but then there has to be like sort of a demand from the actual patients that this could be a thing. But it's like you're kind of a little bit ahead of the curve. So like a patient might not know it needs it yet, but like the incentive for the doctor needs to be there.
Yeah.
And so I think like that's how I like would probably relate the agency ecosystem in Shopify is like you got to go convince the agencies that it's worth your time. And typically that's through spiffs or revenue share or whatever it is. Or maybe it's in the form of like co-marketing gives, like you might have an existing audience that they would benefit from. But yeah, we find that like there are very much so revenue share agreements between tech and agencies, just like there are so between Shopify and our agencies and tech partners. So it's very much built on revenue share, mutual value, overlapping client lists that you can glean from. Like I'll say it's gonna be like that's why like I keep like it's always like there Shopify's app store and agency is not a magic bullet. If you don't have customers to bring to either one of those parties, then no one's gonna want to work with you. So like
Yeah.
first and foremost, your focus is on product-led growth, how you get growth for your actual product yourself. And then like the bigger your customer base grows, the more leverage you have. Like that's all it is. Like the size of your customer base is your leverage. And that's like it's the most important asset you have. And I think that's like what agencies want to see is like, is there demand? What's the revenue share? Do I have a gap? And like, yeah, like how do we work together to win business together?
Yeah. And are there any companies that you've observed where you feel like they're just doing a great job of staying top of mind in the ecosystem? Like the kind of better together joint value prop, whatever it is, like that they're doing with Shopify and like the broader ecosystem is buzzing around. People just observe it.
Yeah, like if I all the top partners, all of our top technology partners come to mind. I think like one really interesting one is a company called Triple Whale, and like full disclosure, I think Shopify invested them a couple months back, but they did just an absolutely incredible job of building a huge Shopify Plus merchant base through their agency channels. And honestly, like their marketing attribution platform. And it was almost like a lot of it was like right time, right product, because obviously with cookies going away and like the decrease in ROAS from Meta and Google and merchants like sort of diversifying their marketing channels, like having a marketing attribution tool is pretty important. So like a lot of that is like they built the perfect product at the right time. But yeah, like some huge percentage of their growth came from all of their agency relationships. And like that was just slowly but surely building relationships. And like it's like you can go to Shopify's partner website and literally get a list of our largest agencies, and I think there's 200 and something of them.
Yeah.
So we don't hide that list.
Yeah. Amazing.
Like we're not saying like you can't talk to them. It's free game, man. Like you could do whatever you want. And I think they just had a particularly like they found a niche, they had a value, they put together a really, really solid partner program. Like I don't know the exact details of like the co sort of revenue share or program details, but yeah, like they're a great example of a company that built on the back of agencies.
Super cool. Yeah, that's amazing to hear. And so I would love to. I've got one last question on kind of the like the founder looking in, and then I want to like kind of jump into your team more and like how you like what you're doing and how those things are set up. But last question on this, so like I think you mentioned, for instance, the checkout process. That's like a real big focus, and that came up from Toby as well. And I've used it myself a bunch of times since it came out. Fantastic product, just like works seamlessly. Love it. Very straightforward. A great experience. I can also imagine for people that are building on the Shopify platform, there's a element of nervousness around, hey, like, and this is the same with any ecosystem where it's like, could my thing be the next built?
Yeah.
And so like, I always say that it's on the founder to really be on the cutting edge of what's being built, so that they're not getting out innovated by a larger company, even
Right.
if it's they partner with. But any tips on that as well, around like just being ahead of the eight ball when it comes to what's on the roadmap, and just making
Yeah.
sure that even if it is going in the direction that you've built in already, you're complementary rather than kind of getting wiped out.
Yeah, yeah. I love this topic, number one. And it's probably like the thing I get asked most
Oh, cool.
as like partnerships lead here. Uh I would say if you're a founder that ends up in an area where Shopify ends up building a first party tool, congratulations, because you've identified like what a very important technology for commerce. So like if you're one of the first to build there and then Shopify builds there eventually, like you did it, good work. Uh, I would also say like I would never tell a founder that our first party products don't compete with them, because like that's just straight, like that's just a lie. Like, of course, like your products are always going to compete in some market or some segment of the market, whether it's like, and most often when Shopify builds a first party tool, it's at like the most merchants most of the time. So it's
Yeah.
for the long haul, right? Like Shopify has 3 million merchants. We identify an area as like a opportunity to help solve merchants, and Shopify tools are typically free. And so, yeah, we end up building in the space. I think what we typically see during those times, though, is that when Shopify builds something, it's a signal to the market that it really matters. So
Yeah.
if you take Shopify email or search or subscriptions or collabs or whatever it is, it's kind of a signal that a merchant should be using that technology in some way. Like you should be thinking about your influencer strategy. You should be thinking about on-site search, because we're seeing more consumers come to websites and actually just type in the thing that they want rather than browse. And like,
Yeah.
obviously you should be sending emails, of course. So I hate to use this analogy because it's like so overplayed, but it's really the best way to describe it, which is like the tide raises all boats.
Yeah.
And so what we typically see when Shopify launches a first party product is that there's actually more demand for it, for that actual technology. And so like the size of the market doesn't shrink, it expands. And so that means there's more business for everybody, not just Shopify, but for our partners as well. And like the canonical example of that is Shopify email. We launched it in, I think, 2019. Like MailChimp, Klaviyo, OmniSend, like they're not smaller companies today as a result of Shopify email. They're bigger companies.
Yeah.
And so there's always, I would say that the true risk is that if you're like you kind of pointed out, is like if you're not innovating and staying ahead of the market, there's always going to be a risk that Shopify's product will be squarely competitive against you.
Yeah.
But like we're at the end of the day, we're a big company, and when we launch a product, we're starting from scratch and we're
Mhm.
building the basics and the basic functionality. So it doesn't mean we're not competitive. It just means that there's an opportunity for you to continue to move up market and continue to innovate in that space. And so it's always like, well, it'll be a game of cat and mouse, but like, yeah, I think overall the industry or that vertical expands as a result of Shopify building.
Yeah, amazing. I love that answer, and I think very honest and also very actionable answer. I think very helpful for all of the founders that are listening today. And
So
so
yeah, like don't be worried. I would say just don't be worried. Just
yeah,
keep building, you
yeah,
know? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, it's not zero sum. That's the
Yeah.
reality. Like in this environment, like people are putting more stuff on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For
Yeah,
sure.
I love
Absolutely.
that. I wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about your team, and like just more for the partner nerds like myself that just loves to understand more about teams and programs and incentives and the whole thing. So could you tell us a little bit more about your team and like the broader Shopify partnership org and how that stuff's set up?
Yeah, absolutely. So like broadly speaking, there's two core partnership functionalities at Shopify. You're either driving revenue or you're driving product outcomes. And so the revenue side of things is mainly agency driven, as we were talking about before. So it's like, yeah, engaging all of our agency and SI partnerships. And it's like, how are you going to bring more revenue to Shopify? The organization that I sit under is actually our product organization. And our job is like, how are we going to drive better product outcomes for our merchants, specifically via the usage of our like platform APIs. I love it because like the outcomes are like better integrations, and I just find that work like uniquely like infinitely interesting.
Mhm.
I like to see, like, the way that I think about our team is like we're a mix of like product managers, partnership managers, and like VCs, because we're constantly looking at like what new technology we need to be partnering with. And what, like, how we're structured is by vertical. So there's 5 or 6 like very key, there's probably 7 actually, and I can name them, but there's like 7 key commerce verticals, like marketing, store design, merchandising, shipping and fulfillment, checkout, marketplaces, and I think I think that covers kind of most of them. And so
Mhm.
there's folks on my team that cover each one of those verticals. So like
Got
we
it.
like to think of them as little mini businesses. And
Yeah.
so obviously this is like a result of having a very large ecosystem. If you're a startup founder or you're a smaller company, you're probably responsible for everything. So like understanding that this is like unique to bigger companies. But yeah, each one of those is like we see as like a mini business. So like the people on my team are very much responsible for understanding that product line and that vertical. Like they should be the de facto expert internally at Shopify. They align with like the PMs, the product directors, and the VPs for each of those product lines. And by the way, the reason that we have those key verticals is because they all align to a product line at Shopify.
Mhm.
So there's always like the outcomes are very like clear. The product lines are very clear, and like the swim lanes are very clear. And then yeah, like it's all about like what product outcomes are we driving. And so that's what we're measured based on. Is we look at the core, what we call core platform priorities for the year, and then we like backtrack into partnership goals. So let's say like we launch the new hydrogen platform, right? Like the one of the goals might be go get 15 to 20 new partners to build hydrogen integrations by the end of the quarter. So it's very cool. It's like you become an expert in product. You're at the table for product conversations, which we love. And then yeah, I can talk more about the revenue side, but that's not what our team focuses on. But happy to share some insights there.
Yeah, no, let's stay focusing on your team, because this is, I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of people that are trying to figure out, uh, should technology partnerships live in the product org, and if it doesn't, like how
Right.
to work
Right.
together with the product org. And so I'm really interested in this in general. So tell me, when you're thinking about like goal alignment, does that mean then that your partner managers' goals may not match up? Like for instance, for one of the lines of business, it might be like API adoption, and for something else it might be like retention of a certain member cohort or user cohort or whatever. Or like do the goals generally match up, and how is it to manage those if they're not?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's a great point. I think to go back to your point just now about like where I've seen product teams or partnerships team typically sit.
Mm-hmm.
Like you usually see it mostly it's under the COO, the CRO, like revenue driven, and again, like totally understandable. I think that where I've seen technology partnerships be most effective, but it takes like some faith, some true faith,
Uh-huh.
uh, is under the chief product officer.
Mm.
And yeah, so we do roll up to our VP of product, Glenn Coates. He's an incredible leader, but it it gives the team the autonomy to truly drive product outcomes without the I would say misaligned incentives of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we believe like pretty firmly in that, like if my team was both driven by revenue and product outcomes, which one do you think we're going to choose?
Yeah.
Uh, you know,
Yeah,
so if
totally.
you have product based metrics so I guess so stepping back a little bit, like Shopify made the decision very early on that we're a platform company. And that's like Toby down. We build the world's best APIs. Obviously, we build Shopify product, which is great for like a lot of merchants, but like we also build a lot of APIs that make Shopify extremely extensible. That's been our approach from the beginning. So
Yeah.
if that's your approach as a company and you are a product led company, then it probably would make sense at one point to have a product partnerships manager. And I've actually seen it work where the partnerships, like the director of partnerships is also like the product manager for the platform, like the API platform. which I find extremely interesting because like what better feedback loop than partnerships into the actual APIs themselves. So if you find that like technical minded person, it often works to have like platform and partnerships connected. But yeah, like we like again, like to your question about goals, they are very much aligned with like whatever the core product team is trying to accomplish. So
Yeah.
that you're right, like they do differ, but they're all related in the sense that like you're driving product outcomes. So I'll give you another example. Like hydrogen was one of the examples, but like checkout's another example.
Yeah.
We're doing a huge checkout migration. Checkout's team is like team goal is to drive a certain number of merchant migrations over to our checkout one sort of paradigm. And in order to do that, you have to have partner adoption adopting these new APIs. So like there's a person on our team that's solely responsible for like driving checkout adoption across like APIs, right? So again, it's like there's nothing wrong with a revenue focused partnership team. And I think I see that probably more often than I see the product led partnerships team. But yeah, like we did make the decision early on that we were platform. And then I think like that's what really drove us to come to this point, which is like a pretty sophisticated, mature like platform partnerships team over time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so then I can imagine a world where there's partners that integrate across the different groups and then also potentially have like a business, like a revenue.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And so like, how do you kind of reconcile multiple partner managers engaging with a single partner?
Right. Good point. There's always a single point of contact. And that
Okay.
is like the most critical thing. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So whatever their core competency is, that's the vertical that they fall under. And
Mm-hmm.
that partnership manager is responsible for delegating the conversations and like prioritizing the roadmap. So you're right. Like we have very large partners. I probably won't name them here because I don't know if that
Sure.
breaches contract, but like we have large partners that build across 5, 6, 7 different product lines. And like you have product teams pinging the strategic partnership manager like, hey, you should have them build this, build this, build this, build this. And so, and it like before you know it, we're asking the partner to do 37 different things. So it truly is up to the partnership manager to actually do like, for our truly, truly large partners, we'll do like sort of like business reviews with them to be like, here's what we've asked you to do. Here's what we deem as most important. And like, here's what we think, here's our opinion on what your Shopify product roadmap should look like over the next 6 months. And then
Mm-hmm.
they say, well, we're trying to grow here. This is a priority for us. This isn't a priority for us. And so it's like, it's almost like a little bit of a negotiation
Yeah.
where you get to a point where you're like, okay, cool. Like we're both happy with, you're going to build for this. We might give you these benefits in terms of co-marketing. You're going to commit to these timelines. We'll commit to these timelines. Yeah. So we certainly prioritize the roadmap, and there's always a single point of contact, because if you didn't have that, it would get messy pretty quickly.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, that makes a ton of sense. And we're coming to the end of our time. I swear I could like probably spend another hour. I say this very often, but I could spend another hour talking to you about this. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface on your team and how you work. And so maybe we'll be able to get you back at some point to talk more about and like dig into this in a little bit more detail. But I always wrap these up with asking, what's something that you learned recently that you would like to share with the folks listening today?
Yeah. Personally or professionally?
Both. We get all sorts. Some people are like, "Hey, take a walk in the morning.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
read this book." Or some people are like, "When you're account mapping, make sure you do X, Y, and Z." So all walks are fine.
I have a 2-year-old at home, and I've learned recently that it's very easy when you're in a position at a technology company. I'm sure everybody on the podcast feels this. Like work is never ending,
Yeah.
and there's always stuff to do. And I just find I've just learned this, maybe not recently, but just over the last 3 months, of like, if I don't prioritize like family and myself, then it affects my work a lot. And so I would just encourage the people that are feeling busy or feeling overwhelmed, or like maybe you're feeling like you're not making an impact of late. I feel like the imposter syndrome or the self-doubt is very real in a lot of like partnerships people, for sure, because a lot of our work is like indirectly impacting organizations. Like just take time for yourself, take a vacation, like go spend time with your kids, go running, go to the park. I find that if I do take time for myself and I like carve out that time and like guilt-free time, by the way. Like, don't judge yourself for it. I'm able to be more effective at work. I've also learned that I love sci-fi books for some reason. I don't know why I
Amazing.
just started reading them, but yeah, it's a little escape from reality.
What was the most recent sci-fi book you read?
Well, it's becoming a Netflix series, and so it's probably pretty like bandwagony for me. But I just read The Three Body Problem. It
So
won
good.
yeah, it's good. It's long, but it's incredible. And so now I'm on to like Dark Forest, I think, which is the sequel. But it's coming to
Yeah,
Netflix, which I'm really excited about.
yeah, exactly. I loved those, but I read them during the pandemic.
Oh, great! Yeah,
And don't be ashamed of being on the hype train because
yeah. They are underhyped, if you ask me. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. I agree.
yeah.
I agree. Like most people haven't heard of them still, but they are fantastic books. And if you ever want to, I love sci-fi books as well. If you ever want to exchange notes, then let me
Yeah, we
know.
might have like a partnership sci-fi book club.
Yeah, exactly.
Sign
I'd
us
be
up.
happy
All
to
right,
do
man.
that. Yeah, awesome. All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Amazing insights here today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.